All right. So this is probably going to be the last interview of the series to celebrate 1,000 downloads on the podcast, True Spirituality with Ange. And today I'm delighted to have Nimisha again. Nimisha was a guest on the podcast remind me, Nimisha, was it April or May? I can't remember.
I think it was April.
Mm.
Yeah, yes, it was April. I'm pretty sure it was April. Yeah.
And I'm also pretty sure a lot has happened in your world since then. So it'll be good to catch
Yes.
up as well, find out what you've been up to. So for some of my guests, we've agreed, I say some because I realized one or two we did something different, but it doesn't really matter. Either way, what we want is to have a conversation about the podcast, how helpful it's going to be, maybe some feedback on some of the other guests, or you've listened to an episode so we can discuss and have your take on it. So on that particular subject, it's not just my opinion, because, after all, I'm only little me. And Nimisha, tell us first, what you do, where you live in the world, and who's your ideal client. I'd love to know that, actually.
So I'm a surgeon and a mindfulness teacher, and I live in Nagpur in India, Nagpur is like the geographical center. Like I love living here. It's literally the heart of the country. And well, my ideal client is or are people who care very deeply about everything in their immediate world, but also in the world at large. And so, because they care very deeply and they're very sensitive, they tend to take too much responsibility for things that are not always their responsibility. They tend to have this propensity to overthink things, and they may struggle with emotional overwhelm. And I like to help them use mindfulness to cut through the overthinking, deal with the overwhelm, emotional overwhelm, and really use mindfulness as a way to nourish themselves and a way to fuel their life and their purpose in life, because they have a larger purpose than just the normal routine of existence. And this is not to say that there isn't a lot of beauty in the mundane moments of life, but that just to say that because they care so much about so many other things, it allows them to live out that purpose without necessarily burning out or getting caught in loops.
You kind of describe me here. So, yeah, wonderful and beautiful. And I agree that also people who care too much can also get upset a lot more because they care.
Yes.
That's almost the thing
Yes.
that came to my
Yes.
mind when you were talking
Yes.
about this.
Yes, they
So
do.
I found you were right. You came in April. It's episode 33. And I wanted to refer that into the video so that people know where to find it. There'll be a link to the podcast in the description box for this video. And of course, all the links to find you and to find out about your wonderful work. So what episode did you choose, Nimisha? Let's have a little chat about
Well,
that.
given all our discussions around this topic and so much of the episode which we did together was on this, I found that I had to listen to your episode on anger. And that's the one, I mean, I've listened to a couple, but that's the one that I kind of took notes down on, because anger is such a subject which is very close to, I think, both our hearts, but especially very close to mine. And yeah, that's the one that I'd love to dive into with you.
All right, so let's do it. You have notes. I don't remember a single word that I said, so this is going to be fun because I'm
We
trying
made
to
this
find.
episode, and it would be always worth a second listen. I almost wanted to listen to it again, but I've been busy and I didn't have the time to listen again. But fortunately, I took good notes the first time I listened. So
Yeah, and you would as a surgeon. You're ace at taking notes, huh? Precise people who know exactly what they need to know. So it was an episode that came out in January, episode 19. Again, we'll put the links in the show notes. So, what was your first impression when you listened to, or your general impression on the episode? Because what's kind of funny is that I did this episode before I met you, before you
yeah,
became my client.
yeah.
So, and then you talk to me about anger, and I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. Did I call this person into my world so we could have these discussions?
Yes, I loved it. I thought how much we need these conversations. We need more such conversations on anger, especially anger in women, but also anger in general, because I think that it's a much misunderstood and maligned emotion. And we're all, in general, as human beings, scared of it to some extent, and rightly so, because sometimes the behavior that accompanies anger can be so explosive and destructive. But the emotion itself, if you separate emotion from the behavior, the emotion itself has so much to offer us, so much wisdom, so much. And so, what I really liked was the approach that you had to anger, which is so similar to mine, which is about recognizing anger and acknowledging it, and then seeing what lies behind that anger, so that we start there and not demonize anger and say, oh, it's bad, and then suppress it, which in turn, and you've said this in the episode, that when we suppress it, we end up, it's going to come out somewhere. It's going to explode somewhere
Yeah.
else. You can only suppress it for so long.
And you know what? I just had a mini aha moment listening to you because whenever I talk to you, I think about my dad because he was a surgeon as well. And we don't need to tell all the reasons why that reminds me of it. But my dad was like that. He was calm for the longest of time. And then you could see that it was brewing. And then when he erupted, it was like a volcano. So, and I think maybe the reason we're afraid of this is maybe because we've been on the receiving end of a lot of hurtful things that were said, or because a lot of people say very hurtful things when they're angry. And so, first of all, why do we do that? Why do we say hurtful things when we're angry? I'm just curious.
you know before kind of we get into that, I was thinking about this, and you were saying we've been on the receiving end of anger, and that's why it feels bad. Actually, the thing is, every emotion is accompanied by these internal body sensations that in context tell us that we're feeling that emotion. And the sensations of anger are not pleasant. They're not pleasant in the body. So even if you never had, say, an explosive parent, or you never were on the receiving end of someone's anger where you were like yelled at or belittled or punished, even getting angry in your own self is not a pleasant experience. It is not a pleasant
Ah,
experience. Your heart is racing. You you're upset. You want to pace. There's that fight or flight energy inside you, and it's not pleasant to have those sensations. So I've been thinking really a lot about this, because I keep looking at my daughter, and I admit to being a very angry person in general. But even before when she was really little, I used to not get that angry with her, right? There wasn't. She was a baby, she was a toddler. And but she was still scared of anger in me as well as anger in herself. And it got me thinking about how these sensations, and we don't pay attention to them, but they're not pleasant. They're not pleasant sensations. And then, like you said, if you are at the receiving end of someone's anger, and they've been hurtful to you, they've been rude to you, they belittled you, or if you were a child and you were punished, it stands to reason that when you say grow up and you have a spouse or a friend, someone who's no longer an authoritative person for you, like in your childhood, your parent or your teacher may have been angry and punished you or been mean to you. But as an adult, just being in that situation, even if the opposite party is no longer punishing you, belittling you, demeaning you, you're still carrying the echo of that, if that makes any kind of
yes.
sense. Because I've seen this
Yeah.
in my interpersonal relationships where, yes, I'm angry, and the person I'm angry at is feeling really hurt and really upset that I'm angry at them. And so I've sat down and I've analyzed my anger, and I've realized that I haven't been rude, I haven't been nasty, I haven't name called, I haven't been, verbally abusive, I haven't been physically abusive, I haven't been aggressive in any way, but I've just been angry and that person has been hurt. And then I realized it's because you're seeing it through that filter, right? Of
Yeah, there's
people
an
being.
echo
As
chamber
to,
there. Yeah.
yeah, it's an echo chamber. But that's not what you asked me. What you asked me was, why are we hurtful when we are angry, right? And I think this is also something you spoke about in your podcast, because you looked at Thich Nhat Hanh's book about the four fears, and you were talking about fear is the emotion behind anger. And I know this is a very popular idea, and I think it's a true idea as well, that anger is not always the primary emotion we have. It's a secondary emotion, because you're feeling fearful, and so you respond with being aggressive because you don't want to show your vulnerability, or you're feeling hurt and you don't want to, you know, Fearful would be like a cornered animal, right? If you've cornered the animal was scared of you and it thinks, okay, there's this wall against my back. Let me attack and see what happens because I'm anyway gone. So it's that kind of thing, but in a human context. Or in my case, I don't like being vulnerable in front of people. So if I'm hurt by someone, I prefer to show it as anger because then I can it's a way to get back power in that dynamic, or it feels like it isn't necessarily true that I'm getting back my power, but I at least I can put up the facade of being powerful, and
Yeah.
not show that actually I'm deeply
Ooh.
hurt. Yeah, so my go-to emotion is anger for a lot of times when I don't want to show that I'm anxious, when I don't want to show that I'm hurt or upset. And then sometimes anger is primary because I feel like the person is encroaching on my boundaries, or I feel like they're being unfair to me. If I see an unfair situation, I get angry. And I'm talking about myself, but I've seen this is true for other people, other dynamics when I've looked at people, being angry, and sometimes there's something behind it, and sometimes it's just anger being protective. It's protecting you. I guess even as a secondary emotion, it's protecting you, right? It's protecting you from showing your vulnerability, from showing your fear. So yeah, there's a lot more to anger than just like, yelling and being destructive.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it can be the fuel for beautiful things. If you use that anger and funnel it, it can be something that pushes you forward, motivates you to do something about a situation. Go ahead.
So, you were saying this, and I really wanted to reference this beautiful book by Harriet Lerner. It's called Dance of Anger. And I think it's a book everyone needs to read because this is exactly what she talks about. Every emotion, brings with it the energy for us to move through that situation, right? And she beautifully shows how, I think it's been a long time since I've read the book. I've been wanting to reread it, but from what I can remember, it's geared towards anger in women, and how a lot of women dissipate their anger in venting, or in ranting about things, and then the energy to change that situation is gone. So say you have a woman who's upset with her husband for some sort of behavior of his, and then she will call up someone, and she will, like her mom or her friends, and she will rant and vent about it, and then that energy is gone, right? And she can go back to that living normally. But the thing is, she could, and it's not easy, and people need support, and I'm not, I've simplified it a lot from what the author puts a lot of nuance into it, but you can take that energy and use it to initiate the conversations that you need to initiate with your spouse or your partner, whoever,
Mm,
saying that this is not acceptable, this is my boundary, I don't like this. And we don't want to do that because that's really hard, and we're socialized not to do that. So we just kind of let it fizzle out. And so
yeah.
I really like what you said about anger. And of course, anger and passion are so close to each other. Anger and passion, anger and excitement. I mean, it's the same energy, right? That adrenaline surge that allows you to do things. So there's so many beautiful things, like you said, we can do with anger. And yeah,
I was thinking whilst you were talking, because anger is a nervous system reaction, which I don't think I've touched on it. And I know you know a lot about the nervous system, so I'm very happy to have this conversation with you. So, do you think so? There's these four ways that we can react to something that happens to us that feels
yes,
threatening or dangerous. And I know we can get angry for other things than just danger, but let's put it in the context of danger, because I've observed that I'm very one. We all have a default mode. So how does that default mode affect how we get angry or even cancel it? Have you ever looked into it a little bit? I'm for the audience who might not know the four different ways that the nervous system reacts when we are faced with real or imagined danger. Let's put it this way, because there's a wide range of things that we can feel are dangerous that might not feel dangerous for someone else. So there's fight, flight, which is most people know, but there's also freeze and fawn. So
yeah,
so the fight is the anger, right? It's the
yes,
person who
yes,
lashes out. The freeze, I mean, I suppose so the freeze would be counteracting the anger really and keeping it in the body. And then maybe it's hurting the body because the adrenaline or anything, or the body doesn't move, or we don't do anything with it. And so
Yeah.
it stays within. So could that, and I'm like completely pulling this out of nowhere, but could that have an effect on our health?
Yes, I think it does. I absolutely think it does. And I don't say this, from there are people who've researched this. There's if you read any of Dr. Gabor Mate's books, he talks a lot about suppressed anger and autoimmune diseases in women. And he draws upon the research that there is to show uh I think it's a massive percentage. It's like, and he draws this correlation really well. I think there are two specific books of his. One is his latest book, The Myth of Normal, which talks about this. But I think he touches upon it in every single book that he has. And there's this other book, and I can't remember the name of this book because unfortunately I went straight to the chapter on anger and read only that chapter. So I don't remember the name of the book, but hopefully it comes back to me. And in these books, he very clearly draws and he gives you beautiful examples about women developing all sorts of autoimmune disease, but particularly I think rheumatoid arthritis related to suppressed anger. And there's a very nice statistical correlation between the autoimmune diseases and the suppressed anger in women. So that might be something worth looking into. And also he talks about how when people experience improvement in symptoms when they find ways to express their anger and to you know the idea I think people think the goal is to never get angry, like you'll be happy or you'll be a good person if you never ever get angry. But I think the goal is to learn to express anger in a healthy manner. And like I
Yeah.
said, sometimes the opposite person is not going to be able to see that as a healthy expression of anger if they're going to look through that filter of, oh my God, this person is angry, so they're trying to hurt me, or I'm getting hurt because this person is angry. But we all kind of need to keep having these conversations about what exactly in context would a healthy expression of anger look like for us. Interpersonal,
And
interpersonally.
also
I think
perhaps
yes,
normalize anger more, because it's there's this almost hypocrisy. I feel that there's a lot of violence and anger in films, and that to the point that would be totally unacceptable in in real life. And then in real life we go to the opposite direction, where we're all supposed to never be angry, never say a bad word,
yeah,
never be upset. And it's not realistic. And could we find like sort of a middle road where people would say, no, it's absolutely fine to get. And I remember for me, the crunch was when I had my first child and he became a toddler and he had these tantrums that actually lasted years. And all my kids actually lasted years because of their autism. So I had to look into that. I had no choice other than to do that. And then, of course, when you're faced with the anger and the tantrum of a toddler, um, it sort of reflects back on you and it can trigger you if you haven't dealt with your
yeah.
own anger. Have you felt that as well?
Yes and no, because I think I was lucky that the pandemic, lucky in the sense that the pandemic happened at the time when my child was getting into her toddler years. So I didn't have to cope with a lot of outside judgment, and I had a lot of time at that time to go for weekly therapy, to like journal sometimes several times a day, to practice mindfulness all the time, and so and to read a lot about normal childhood development and uh, how anger and tantrums doesn't mean they're bad kids. It just means that they need, the frontal lobe is not developed, and it's our job to kind of teach them how to cope with their anger. But also it's something that they will mature into, especially if they see it
Mm,
modeled in us. And that's when I changed my focus from so much of focus on what my child is doing and how she's behaving, and instead started focusing on my responses and what they were telling me about myself, what they were telling me about my past, what they were telling me about how I was parented with the best of intentions, but focusing on
mm,
my story rather than on, oh my God, people will think I'm a bad mom because my child is. Actually, I've been fortunate. I haven't had a lot of those situations. And I think it was because of the pandemic and, kind of being in a more closed and very limited social environment. So the situations didn't come up. But I know it can be very hurtful for moms. And I know also that then a lot of moms, they have all this suppressed anger as women, And now their children are expressing this anger, and they've been told that anger is a bad thing. And now they think their children will grow up into these angry people, and then it reflects on them. Like, I think it's a recipe for disaster for moms, because there's so much happening there. They've been,
Yeah,
punished when they were angry kids. They've learned to suppress their anger. Society tells them anger is a bad thing. Society tells them that their kids being angry is a sign that they are a bad mom. My gosh, it's so much. I mean, it's so much for one person. It's like a pressure cooker. No wonder then moms exploded their kids. And I'm not justifying getting angry at your kids or punishing them, but I'm saying there's an explanation why moms tend to get so,
they have
you
it
know,
hard. Or,
rap and
yeah.
yeah,
And also, it's when you're out about and you have that, and I'm not saying this as an ageist thing, but because the generations before us dealt with it completely differently. And it was actually,
yeah,
I don't know if you had corporal punishment, but we were spanked and we were hit when we were angry and we were punished civilly and physically. So actually, in a way, it nips it in the bud pretty quickly. Although it then comes out when they have your parents have a back turned, and then you hit your brother and sister because you've been hit, so that perpetuates that thing.
yes,
But
yes.
so
You
in
know,
a way, they had it easy. Well, I'm not saying easy, but the way that society functioned was so entirely different. But you still have these people walking around and judging other parents that don't parent like they have, and can't you behave in public places? And of course, in my case, with four autistic kids, it takes it to a whole completely whole level, which
I
means
can,
that then you isolate yourself at home because you can't cope with the way that the world is looking at you and your kids, and it
yeah,
breaks your heart. And there's all sorts of layers to that. But
yeah. I actually think about this a lot because my daughter's 5, and I actually made a post around this because I thought it was important to say this. I've never once felt like hitting my child, and I don't claim any moral superiority for this. I was not hit as a kid. I think that has a huge impact on how we parent. It's not that my parents were against it. I was just one of those really quiet, very sensitive, very quiet, keeps to herself, like good girls. I was never hit as a kid. So it's just something that's not there in me. I'm a yeller. I'll yell and then I'll cool down and apologize to my child. But I don't have that urge to hit. But if you've been, because I know I see this in my friends all the time. The ones who were pinched, there were a lot of my friends who were not necessarily hit, but they would be pinched to behave.
yes, yes.
And they have this uncontrollable urge. And I empathize so much because it must be so hard where it's almost been wired into you, that response. That when a child behaves like this is what you do. When I behave, and I think there's a lot of intermingling between our child and our emotions. So, you're still a unit for quite a long time, like the mother and the child, or even the father and the child. I don't necessarily want to make a gender judgment on this. But I know that, you feel like your child's behavior reflects on you, and then you were pinched as a child, and then you think that's, it's not that you're thinking it. It's literally like, I feel like it's a wired system because I've seen it with so many people. If they were, put in the timeout, then that's what they have that strong instinct to do, with to tell to their child, go and stand in the corner. If they've had parents been sarcastic to them and, say nasty things, it comes out almost automatically, even after doing a lot of work on yourself. So I feel like the way you were parented, and this is not to blame our parents who parented in a different time and a different society and without so much understanding of trauma, and, without, to a great extent, the support that we have now, even if it's online support and not necessarily in-person support. So I'm not being judgmental about my own parents or anyone else's parents, but I think that response get kind of hardwired in you. The way you were treated as a child
Mm.
is the way you treat a child. And even if you're a very conscious parent, that automatic body response is really, really hard to overcome. I've seen it in so many of my friends and other women who, they try their level best. They go to therapy, they do all the work, but that urge is really strong. And it takes a lot of energy to overcome that urge and not behave that way. And then obviously in times when your bucket is really empty, you don't have the energy to, say not lash out at your child, or not give your child one tight slap, or like not pinch your child, or whatever it is that you had done unto you. Again, I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying there are explanations for the way people behave. And if like I said, referring back to my ideal client and the way I think a lot of people are, if you're a good hearted person who's trying to change your behavior, and you're not able to, it can bring in so much of that element of shame that keeps you stuck there. But if
Yeah.
you see that there's a reason for the way you are and there's an explanation, you can you can cut yourself some slack and not let that explanation become an excuse. But then you can not be stuck in the shame spiral where, oh my god, I'm such a bad mom because I did XYZ
Mm.
thing. You can just learn to repair, move on, and each time it would get easier, is what I believe. It's very hard to not hit your child or not pinch your child from sheer willpower. A lot of moms were like, I will never do this, and then they're holding themselves so tightly. They're trying so hard. It's all pure willpower, and willpower is it's not an endless supply. I don't know if you've read this about willpower, but if you have to keep using it, you kind of it's like a battery. It gets over at some point of time, and then you can't rely on it anymore. So it's always better to have your inner system. I hope I'm making sense, but your inner system kind of, why do I get angry? What are my responses? And yes, I make sense in the context of my story, in the context of my history, and what can I do about it? And then when I still lose it, how do I repair? How do I apologize? How do I get out of this situation? So yeah,
So I'm
that's what
hearing
I
a
think.
couple of things here that I'm really loving about what you said. And the one thing is understanding is the first step. And without understanding, you can't actually change anything. Shame keeps us in the locked, trapped in what we're doing because we can't evolve because we're too ashamed to even talk about it, look at it, or anything like that. And you talk about repairs. I think these things are really important because I haven't talked about repair in the episode. I don't think so. And I'd love
Yeah,
for you to share a bit of wisdom about the repair side of things. And I feel personally, I know that I've lost it, like any mom has. I've shouted at my kids, but I always came back and say, I'm sorry, I got angry, I lost it. And I did feel that it was very important part of parenting to show that I was human and maybe even give them permission to understand that getting angry is not that they're bad children. Even their parents do it. It's just how you manage it and how you deal with it that matters.
yeah, yeah. I think you've summarized it beautifully. That's just what we have to do. Uh, I think repair is so beautiful because repair helps us to show our children that we're human and that human beings will make mistakes. Repair allows for the possibility of better than perfection. I think repair shows you that, you know, it's that, there's this wonderful meme about this Japanese art of, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but where they have cracks in a vase and then they repair it with gold. So it's called, I can spell it, Kingtsu, and I'm not sure how to say this, but that the anything which is cracked is repaired with gold. So you have these gold threads weaving through whatever it is, and it's even more beautiful after repair and even more valuable after repair than it is before it, when it was flawless and perfect. And I think this is such a good metaphor, and it's not mine. It's all over the internet, but I think it's such a beautiful metaphor of repair is in any relationships, because I think it has the potential to make your relationship even stronger. And like you said, you apologize, you take responsibility for both your emotion and your behavior, because our emotions come from us and our behavior is it's habit, it's hardwired from our past. So it's actually all us. There may be a stimulus from the outside, but nobody else can make you angry. Your anger is your own.
Mm.
You would get
And
angry
that's
in different
not
situations.
something
I
that's
would get angry
very,
in different situations, right? This,
yeah. And yet a
it's
lot
not
of people
universal. It's
believe
it's my
that someone
responsibility.
else. And
Yeah,
yeah, my
it's
belief
me.
was completely
So
that it was someone else to start with. So that's a huge shift, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And so, and this goes back to what you say in the episode, because you say recognize that you're angry. Recognize that you're angry, and acknowledge and accept that you're angry. And I find that a lot of the talk around anger for women and especially mothers. This was another post I found where there was a mother who wrote this post saying, I'm not angry, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not angry, I'm exhausted. I'm not angry, I'm touched out. I'm not angry, I'm carrying the emotional and mental and physical burden of this entire family. And it's like this long post and a very beautifully written one. And of course, that mother I can't presume to say that she's angry. Of course, she knows best what she is. But I feel like we look for these other nice words: overwhelm, exhaustion, taking on all the emotional and physical burdens. They're all feeders into anger. So acknowledging that we're just human, whether we're mothers or women or men or whatever, whatever identity we have, as part of being human, anger is just it's just part of the deal. It just comes with being human. It's like a color of the rainbow. That's just how it is. You can't get rid of it. It's there. And so we need to acknowledge that we're angry. And once we do that and accept and take responsibility for our anger, I think that can be extremely powerful to model to our children. Again, so much of parent-child literature is around, even gentle parenting and conscious parenting resources are around how to tackle children's behavior. But I feel like modeling is so much more powerful. It's so much more powerful because they see it in action. You can explain it to them 1,000 times, but eventually kids are going to learn from what they see. And so when they see you saying, yes, I got angry, they're not going to be ashamed about being angry anymore. And I think this is really important, especially for women, to not be ashamed of being angry. And then when they say, see, you take responsibility for your behavior, they take responsibility for their behavior and be like, yeah, I was angry and I hit this person, and hitting isn't correct. But, and then when you show them how to express their anger in a healthy manner, my daughter often asks for scripts. She'll ask me, especially because her first language, she speaks to me in English. And so the language she speaks in school and to her friends is not the same. She's very fluent, but not as fluent. And she's about 5. So she'll ask me, how do I say in Hindi so and so thing? Because when my friends do this thing, it makes me really angry. And I want to be able to tell them, don't do this, but they don't understand if I say it in English. So can you tell me what to say in Hindi? And I think, like for me, those are, if I was scoring myself, those are like A+ parenting moments. I feel so happy because I'm like, okay, you know what? She knows that she has to have the words to say this thing so that she doesn't, hit or throw things at them. And of course, she's 5, so she still had moments where she hits, but she will immediately apologize, and that is because I apologize to her all the time, all the time. And yeah, so I just think that I think that repair is just a beautiful thing, and taking responsibility, and not just with parents and children. We're talking a lot about mother and children, but even in an interpersonal relationship, right, with your spouse or with your friend, if you're able to say, I'm angry, I need a timeout, and then you come back with, this is why I was angry, this is my boundary, how much would it deepen that relationship rather than
Mm.
just um, suppressing that and then being passive aggressive later, or suppressing that and gossiping about your spouse or friend to another friend or someone in your family. Instead of that, if you were just able to say, this makes me really angry, and that person is able to say, okay, and not take it personally, because they know that your anger is your anger, and then you take your time and you figure it
Yeah,
out and then come back with a solution. Ah,
yeah.
that would be
And
the dream.
And what I hear as well is the triangulation, which I don't know if our audience is aware of. So I'd like to explain that a little bit, because very
Yes,
often,
please.
if you don't feel safe enough to share that your emotions with someone, you're going to vent with someone else, or you're going to gossip, or you're going to speak behind their back, when really the solution is in front of you. The solution is to talk to the person who has hurt you, upset you, whatever, and then clear it out. And it's very cathartic when you're able to do that. Now, I want to add that it's not always safe to do that, because there's some people who are not emotionally safe, especially abusive people. But when you are in a safe relationship, that's actually the definition of a safe relationship, is that you can feel all of your emotions and no one's gonna try and hurt you with how you feel, and they'll be able to listen to you. That listening skill is so important, isn't it? So it starts with listening to yourself, to be aware of your
Yes.
emotions. And very often when you're not in touch with your body, which I hadn't for years, because again, it wasn't safe to feel the emotions as a child. If you don't have a safe space, then you keep all your emotions bottled up inside. So first you have to be able to connect with your body and recognize what is happening inside that. Because I actually, something I didn't mention in the podcast, and I don't know if you read that book by Candace Perth, I think she's called, Molecules of Emotion. Every emotion actually creates chemistry in your body. So once you've had the thought and once you've had the emotion, your body takes over with that, and it can be very hard. It's like a wave. Almost, I'm
Yeah,
not saying that you don't control it anymore, but there's a lot more to deal with once that's started than just to say, no, I'm not going to do this, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I was also going to say it. I'm glad you brought up abusive people, because obviously it's not safe. It's not safe to do that with an abusive person. But say someone isn't abusive, but they are in other ways toxic, then your anger is supposed to help you set a boundary with them. See, in a safe relationship or in a loving relationship, in an imperfect loving relationship, your anger is supposed to open up avenues for expression. In other places, it's supposed to help you set up a boundary. And in case of abusive people, it's supposed to getting in touch with your anger for the victim can be a way that they leave that relationship. And I'm not saying it's easy, but this is what I was saying when I was talking about the book Dance of Anger, where that energy of anger is it's so maligned, but it's an energy that's really there to help you move through that particular situation. And it's not easy. And actually, we're not meant to be doing this alone. We're supposed to be doing it in community. But I think it helps. It helps to know that energy is really there to help you, to shepherd you through that. It's like it's a wave, and you learn to ride that wave. You're not, it's not useless. It's not just meant to be suppressed or thrown away or never felt, or whatever else people seem to think we should be doing as good human beings and good mothers. Yeah, I think anger
Yeah.
is a
And
vital
in a
part of it.
way, it shows you that there's something you need to look at within. Because
Yeah,
anger can happen
absolutely.
with a trigger as well. And I was having this discussion with someone else that I believe personally now that triggers are gifts given to you.
Yeah,
They're the
I think
gift.
it was us. I think it was
Yeah.
us. We were having that conversation.
Because
Oh,
once you give, you have the trigger. If you don't feel that someone else is responsible for making you upset, and you take it and you look at it, you unpack it and you look what's inside, that's actually creating a path of freedom for you. Because the more you resolve your
yeah,
triggers, the more you understand them, the less they're going to have that hold on you. They only have a hold on you for as long
absolutely.
as you don't understand them to a certain
That's
extent. I mean,
true.
then if there's trauma deep within the body, then more work needs to be done. But for people
And
who are
work
not,
may need
yeah,
to be done in support with a therapist, or in support with, like, I just feel this need to say that we're not meant to be doing all of this work all alone, like sitting in this corner and figuring our own selves out for ourselves. We are allowed to we're allowed to seek outside support, and we're allowed to pay for support. We're meant to have communities and other people that we can do this with, because again, I feel like people think that anger is and this may sound contradictory to what we've just been saying, but anger is not, it's not a you problem, because it's not a problem at all. But it is a you responsibility, but no one said you have to do that alone. You get to ask for help and support around it. I actually wanted to talk about this thing about how we did touch upon it. And oh, that book, I got the name of the book. The Body Says No, by Gabor Mate.
yeah,
It's the when the body
okay,
when the body says no. And that's where he talks about suppressed emotions, especially in women, and especially anger and autoimmune diseases. So that's what I wanted to say, because I wanted to bring it back to how um, every emotion has these internal body sensations that we feel. And I think that's important, because as someone who teaches and practices mindfulness, it brings me back to this mindfulness practice which you call a body scan. And so we spoke about how anger doesn't feel good in your body, but learning to locate your emotions in your body and the sensations that they produce, not necessarily when you are in the throes of anger, but in more regulated moments, when you can localize your anger to parts of your body, it kind of grounds the emotion in reality, if that makes sense. Otherwise, emotions can be very we can think of it something that's just in our mind, and that, oh, I was angry and now I'm not, and it's all gone. But especially when we have anger as a secondary emotion, if you learn to locate it in your body, then you can locate what's beneath it. So you may find that you're also feeling sad, or you're also feeling disappointed, or you're also feeling, this is actually how I found out that I outwardly project anger, but sometimes I'm anxious, outwardly project anger, but sometimes I'm ashamed, or sometimes I'm hurt about something, especially when I'm really upset or feeling vulnerable. This is how I did it, because through this practice of body scans, I learned to know how different sensations, different emotions feel in different parts of my body, if that makes any sense at all. And I just think that's also a missing piece when it comes to emotions, because when we talk a lot, and especially we've been talking a lot about the past and reasons why we're angry, I feel like it becomes a head exercise. And if we don't bring the body in, and the body is where it all happens, it's the playground of our emotions and everything, and diseases, right? See, we already drew that connection between suppressed anger and diseases happening in our body. I think it's important to bring things back to the body, and to um, locate your various emotions. And then you also said this really nice thing about what is your anger trying to tell you, and that's a part which I really like, because there's this beautiful poem by Rumi called The Guest House, where he says that every morning open up your guest house, which is basically your body, to whatever's going to come, whatever emotions are going to come. And some will come as a gentle breeze, and some will come like a storm of, and it will, destroy your whole house. But every visitor to your guest house is going to bring you a gift. He's basically talking about your emotions. And I found this, I'm not a poetry person. I still don't read a lot of
Me
poetry or
neither.
anything,
No.
but this one poem, it literally changed the way I approach emotions in myself, because now I can envision this table, and then I have my anger sit down, and I have it talk to me and say what it needs to say. And then I'll find that, oh, anger has actually it's brought sadness
Someone
as well.
else.
Yeah, someone
Yeah.
else has come, and then they have something to say. And then there's the person who feels the angriness was wrong, and then that part of me has to. So this image of either a guest house or a table, where various emotions or thoughts that you have can come and sit and have their say. I don't know, but it's been extremely helpful to me. And unfortunately, I lost. I don't know where this is, and I can again look this up. There's another very similar, very beautiful poem for children. Specifically, it's a children's book, and I loved it because it talks about the same thing, but in a way that children can understand. And I find as an adult, but as a mother, so many things that don't make sense to me when I read them. And this is going to sound so funny, but they don't make sense when I read them in adult self help books. Make sense when I read them in books written for kids. And I think this is because a lot of us didn't get that. We didn't get that kind of parenting as we've spoken about. So there's a child part of us that's waiting to understand these things. And when you show it through a kid's book with beautiful imagery, with metaphorical language, with magical language, I think there's a part of us that, at least some of us, I found it to be true. And I find a lot of my mom friends find it to be true. There's something very healing about seeing it from that perspective. So if I find out the name of that book, I will give it to you so you can, because it's a kid's book, so it's obviously very short. But otherwise, this poem by Rumi is it's beautiful, and I think it would help people.
But it actually makes so much sense what you said, because most of us have a child inside of us that has been hurt, that has some scars from the parenting, from the bullying, whatever it is. And I found that for me as well, some of the most profound work that can happen is when we use either art or music or movement or something that doesn't speak to the mind, because the mind will tend to overanalyze, it will tend to dissect, it'll tend to try to want to understand, but it's not through understanding that we heal all this stuff, it's through feeling. And I love that you do a lot of art, and I think you bring a lot of your art into your practice as well, because I found that art expresses things in the way, especially for me, visual art. I started doodling in class when I was like a teen, and these doodles did so much good for me because they were a way for me to express my emotions. And of course, Zen Tangle and all that sort of stuff didn't exist back then, but And now it's completely mainstream and well documented, and everybody does it. But there's something about putting pen to paper and not taking it out of your head that I find is very
Yeah.
powerful. And it speaks because your inner child, and not everybody believes in inner child work, but I think it's very powerful because they don't respond to words, or they don't respond to explanations. And so what's your take on that? I'd
I
love
was going
to.
to say this sometime earlier, but then we got caught up in our discussion, and I was going to say this actually about how dance, music. Oh yes, it was when you spoke about violence in movies. Uh, because I did so much, reading when my child was small about normal childhood development. I read a lot about violent play in children, not risky play, but violent play. Where your kids are playing killing games or shooting games or fighting games, and it's a game. It's a game. And it's sometimes very hard for parents, especially parents who are pacifists and who are anti-war and those kind of things, when their kids play war games or shooting games, even if they've not bought their kids guns as toys. But you can just do this and it can be a gun, right? And it can be very distressing
Yep.
for parents. And especially from a lot of American early childhood educators and psychologists, I have got this very beautiful perspective about how, for a child, a play is a way of discharging this kind of sometimes aggressive energy or angry energy that is not necessarily focused or directed, not the kind that can move you through a situation, but that's just there. That's just part of being human, just part of being growing up, being a child, and being or even being an adult, just being human. And that's also the purpose that sometimes violent movies or murder mysteries or thrillers or video games sometimes serve for us. I know that there's a lot of evidence that it can feed these tendencies in people. And so that's not the part where I want to go into. I want to go into this part where it can be a way to discharge your energy. That's when I was thinking about how dance, art, all of these things can also be a way to sometimes, because anger has important messages. But if it's so loud that it's shouting in your ears and you can't hear anything at all, you need to kind of discharge some of that energy so you can reach a place where you can listen to that anger, if that makes sense. Like if the thunderstorm is so violent, it's going to destroy the crops, then that's not the kind of rain you want, right? But you want rain to feed the crops. So to get to that point where we can listen to our anger, sometimes we need to do things that will discharge some of that energy. And I think this is where, what you're talking about, doodling and uh, drawing, journaling, all of these things can be so helpful to get that initial energy out.
And
And then you can be like, oh, now I can listen to what my anger has to say. Like now I'm in a more centered or grounded place. Now I'm in a place where I can listen to what it has to say, because sometimes you're so overwhelmed. It has to go somewhere. And so,
yeah, and one of the things I've learned recently this year is that when the nervous system is activated, movement is the only thing that's really going to make a difference.
yeah.
So even walking. But
Yeah.
my kids play fighting a lot, and so they just do all these kind of moves and everything, and they
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
really hurt each other. But I can see that it does a lot for them, and
Yes, yes.
it's
Because,
fascinating to watch as well. It's very good.
yeah, I did the somatic trauma therapy course, and part of it was the immense privilege of watching the founder of somatic experiencing, Peter Levine. Uh, I had these 4 classes where we could see him interacting with his and so with clients, with actual client videos, which were shot with their consent for educational purpose. And he catches these small movements that they are making when they're talking. And then he encourages them to complete the cycle of movement. And that releases sort of kind of, and I'm again putting it very crudely and simplistically, but kind of trapped energy that has been there around that
Mhm.
issue when they're talking about it, and then they kind of complete it. And it's exactly what you're saying that you witnessed in your sons. And this actually, I was laughing when you said that, because my therapist at one point told me, because we used to talk about anger a lot, and I was at that time really very scared of my anger. I felt like it was this beast in the basement. Like, what if one day I explode and I'm violent or I'm aggressive or something. Like I felt like it was this untamed beast in my dungeon. And she kind of showed me it isn't. Like that you've never been that way, and there's no reason why you will be that way. Like she got me through that fear of it. But she used to tell me, she was like, if you're really angry at your spouse, why can't you throw a pillow at him? And I'm just like, no, my God, I can't, I can't. That would be so violent and aggressive. And coming from the backgrounds that he and I come from, it would be very violent and aggressive for us to do that. But now I see the sense of what she says, because sometimes it says it's just completing that, and a
That
pillow is not a
physical,
hurtful, and you don't have to throw it at him, but she was always encouraging me to have some form of kind of physical expression, maybe of anger. So while I don't need it anymore, I encourage it in my daughter, and I find that it helps a lot. When she's angry, she usually knows where her anger is, and a lot of times she feels angry in her hand, which is why she wants to hit someone when she's angry. And if we tell her, I can see that you have this hitting feeling in your hand, do you want to press against my hands? And she will press against my hands or my husband's hands, and as she presses, I can feel that angry energy kind of dissipating, because she's finished that movement cycle which has started in her. uh, if we were to say punish her or suppress it in her, it would come out somewhere else. She might hit her dolls, or she might hit her friends, or and like I said, she's a 5 year old. It's not that just because we do all of this, she's never hit another kid, or she's never been in. It's not like she's any kind of perfect child, and nor do I want her to be. But I'm just saying, these are things that I've observed, and they're fascinating, because it gives us. So if you're an adult who has this urge to hit, you may find it helpful, like to press against a wall and get that
yeah.
energy out, or to squeeze a stress ball, or that actually is the freebie that I've been working on. Ways to kind of get that angry energy out, things to do to get that angry energy out, so that you can, center yourself again. And
That
you're not
sounds
pushing away
perfect.
anger, just finding yourself in that angry moment, because anger can, like you said, it's a wave. It can
Mm.
it can overwhelm you. So you're just kind of standing your ground so that it's not overwhelming you, and you have some sort of way to communicate with it, and not be destructive in your anger.
I suppose if you continue with the metaphor, it's surfing the wave rather than being engulfed
Yeah,
by
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yes. So the wave. Yes, yes. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Mm. Well, it's been such a delight to talk to you again, with you, sorry, Nimisha, about this topic, which you have so much wisdom to share about. Um, I guess I want to tie it back in just before we finish with the whole spiritual, I suppose, umbrella that we're talking about this
Oh,
here.
yes.
And I personally, rightly or wrongly, believe that harnessing that anger, understanding it, and taking ownership of it is the spiritual thing to do. But at the same time, we were both raised Catholic, and we were taught to fear the angry God in the sky,
We can't get
that would
angry ourselves. Just
so,
that anger is one of the seven deadly sins, but God can get angry and he can destroy the world and he can smite people.
well,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm sorry for any Catholics listening who might be offended, but uh,
yeah, it's quite extreme. And so no wonder we've had this love-hate relationship with anger, because on the one
yes,
hand, it's not acceptable, but God can do it. What the dichotomy, it's just, and then it's very confusing. So I hope that this discussion is going to be helpful to our listeners.
yes.
I want to thank you for coming again to have a chat
Thank you for
for the
having me.
celebrations, and all the links will be in here, and share widely if you think this might help. I think definitely parents need some support with anger, because I think also sometimes anger can come when you don't feel supported. So um, I think that's important. And again, if we observe a mum losing it with their child, instead of judging, having that compassion of thinking, oh my God, they must be so overwhelmed. What can I do to help? Um, I think the world will change
Oh, that would make
significantly.
such a difference. I think the world would change if people started looking at overwhelmed parents, and especially mothers dealing with, trying to cope with their own anger and with anger in their children, with, instead of that judgment lens, being like what can I do to help? Or, you know, even just being neutral, even that would probably be better. Like just not standing and staring and gawking and making a
Yeah,
spectacle out of them. You know, sometimes just giving them the privacy they
space.
need to sort things out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Even in
gosh,
public
that
spaces. Yeah.
yeah, that would be beautiful. Well, maybe we can aim at, spreading the word.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. And we'll come back with another. Well, actually, this might be the last interview of the series for the celebration of the 1,000 downloads, but obviously, there'll be a lot more interviews on the podcast. So thank you, everyone. Bye for now.